Good evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones. Joining us tonight, essayist, speechwriter and author Don Watson, Liberal Senator for Victoria James Paterson, climate change activist Naomi Klein, who's in Australia to accept this year's Sydney Peace Prize, Institute of Public Affairs fellow Georgina Downer, and the Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, Anthony Albanese. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. Q&A is live on ABC TV in New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. Everywhere else on News 24 at 9:35 Eastern Daylight Time. Or you can watch and listen live on iView, on Facebook and News Radio. Well, our first question tonight comes from Darren Varker.
This is a question for Don Watson. You were the skilled speechwriter to Paul Keating, who himself was influenced and employed by 1930s Labor big man Jack Lang. Both were cutting in their wit and put-downs. And the question is it a human right to be able to offend people?
Don, human right to be able to offend?
It's a human inevitability. I don't know how you can't really remove of causing offence. I know it was on this program, I think George Brandis said that everyone had a right to be a bigot and everyone has a right to be a fool. On the other hand, it's funny, in George Brandis's workplace, the mildest slur on a person, let alone a racist slur or a religious slur, would have the President of the Senate pulling that person into order and ruling it out of order. So he works in the safest workplace possible. I'm not sure that the Parliament, therefore, should have rights that other people don't. But let me put it this way. I don't know why the rest of the society shouldn't be protected in the same way that people in the Parliament are. Just the same, in the case of the Bill Leak cartoon, which I thought we were going to discuss, are we?
Well, actually, I was going to ask you, we know the cartoon was about Aboriginal men and personal responsibility. I mean, what did you think of it? Because it's obviously incited a huge amount of debate as to what's appropriate, what is offensive, and indeed what's racist.
Well, I think the cartoonists are different, and I looked at that cartoon. You want to look away, but you want to look away from a Goya. You want to look away from a lot of things. And I think that probably that Bill Leak's motives in this, I think the sympathy is with the women and children who are the victims of male violence in Aboriginal communities. And anybody who knows a lot about Aboriginal communities will tell you that some of the things that happen there, the words dysfunction don't do justice to what's actually happening. Inappropriate doesn't apply. Political correctness will get you nowhere in this position. I hate political correctness. I hate anti-political correctness more, though, and I'm much more suspicious of it, because it's nearly always an agenda underneath it. So it's a very, it's the quintessential vexed question, and the reason I gave up dinner parties.
And here you are talking about it.
Yeah, I'm
going to bring Naomi Klein in. Have you seen this cartoon? Did it actually make the newspapers in Canada?
Yeah, I saw it. It was international news, and I think Australians should know this, right? That it was shocking enough that I saw it in a national newspaper in Canada, and was appalled by it.
Why were you appalled by it? What was it that appalled you?
I was appalled because it so clearly played on these very ugly stereotypes, because I understand the history of abuse of Indigenous children and intergenerational trauma that is created, that is, I think, a large part of the reason why there is that kind of abuse. And I understand this because it's true in my country as well, in Canada, where we had a system of sending Indigenous children to boarding schools where abuse was rampant. And that's why it was news in Canada that this is considered acceptable in Australia to appear in a mainstream newspaper. So, I'm more interested... Are you saying
it wouldn't pass muster in Canada? You wouldn't be allowed to...
Look, I do not want to portray Canada as some, anti-racist ideal here. But no, I don't believe it would pass muster. I could be proven wrong, but that's why it was news, because it was so shocking. And it's shocking... It becomes more shocking with time as we find out about the current abuse against Indigenous children in detention in this country. And now to see this huge uproar about the supposed freedom of speech to express these kind of abhorrent views, I'll tell you something else as an outsider. I find it shocking that people on Nauru and Manus are lighting themselves on fire and sewing their mouths shut so that they can be heard, because no cameras and no journalists are allowed in there, or it's extremely rare. They are so desperate to have their freedom of speech heard that they're self-immolating. And I want to know where the outrage is in this country about their freedom of speech and the freedom of whistleblowers, the doctors, the teachers who are speaking out against this atrocity, this international atrocity.
Let's ask James Patterson, as representing the government.
Well, to come back to the original question, freedom of speech is a human right, and we've learnt within a number of court cases that Section 18C...
Actually, the question was, is it a human right to be able to offend people?
Yes, and I'm
different.
Answering that by saying freedom of speech is a human right, and there's now a number of court cases under Section 18C which demonstrate it does restrict freedom of speech. The most recent is the Queensland University of Technology students case, where for 3.5 years they were hauled through the court.
We're going to come to that in a moment, James, so just stick for a moment to the Bill Leak cartoon, which has been discussed. What's your view of it? Because your own Indigenous Affairs Minister, Nigel Scullion, said he was appalled by the cartoon when he first saw it and said there was absolutely no place for depicting racist stereotypes. That's your Indigenous Affairs Minister.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a confronting cartoon. I was confronted when I saw it. I think, though, that it has stimulated an important discussion about really serious issues, and many Indigenous leaders have been talking about the problem of fatherhood in Indigenous communities, and it is a problem, and we should discuss it and the reasons behind it. I am troubled, though, that the Human Rights Commission has solicited a complaint about the Bill Leak cartoon, is now investigating that complaint, and it is likely that it will end up in the courts, as the QUT case did. And it demonstrates again that Australians are not free to express their opinions.
Can I just interrupt there? Just a fact check here, really. You said the Human Rights Commission solicited it. I mean, there was a story today suggesting that some lawyers from an Aboriginal legal aid fund in WA had done so.
Well, no, but before they did so, the Race Commissioner, Tim Soutphommasane, publicly called for people who had been offended about this to make complaints. This is a public servant employed on taxpayers' money who actively is out soliciting complaints to silence a cartoonist in a newspaper. I think that's an incredibly disturbing thing, and I think the case is now building for reforming the law that allows this to happen.
OK, let's move on to our next question, which is also on this, and we can bring in the other panellists afterwards. It's Jeff Trager.
Yes, good evening. In light of the last events that you just touched in your conversations, I just want to mention Julian Porteos for just doing his job, supplying this anti-gay marriage pamphlet within the Catholic school. The students, as you just mentioned, which I find it, I had this chance to see this snapshot where one of the students said that I just got kicked out of the Indigenous computer room. The university, what is it, the CUT, is fighting segregation with segregation, which to me is quite constructive, very smart, and nothing offensive about that. Why should these kids should be dragged in that? Plus, not to mention then, obviously we have this big conversation nationally here about same-sex marriage. When, excuse me, if you are siding with the interests of the kids, whatever you think is the interest of the kids, you will be liable there.
We'll have to get you to come to your question, Jeff.
Yeah, well, this is my question. Being liable for everything that doesn't go accordingly to the political correctness that we are just discussing as well. Don't you guys feel that we are perhaps unwittingly installing a new dictatorship here?
OK, let's go to Georgina Downer first of all.
Well, I think you raised some really important issues there, Jeff. Not being able to discuss your different issues, raise an opinion that differs from the status quo is constraining freedom in our democracy. And one of the things that makes Australian society such a rich and free society is the ability to debate issues in a frank and fearless way. And the lack of due process in the QUT case which you raised, where these 3 university students made a couple of very, I would have thought most people here would think, pretty anodyne comments on Facebook. QUT is fighting segregation with segregation. And then, without their knowledge, a complaint was made. 14 months later, the Human Rights Commission then informs these kids that a complaint has been made against them, gives them 3 days' notice to turn up to a conciliation hearing. Some of them are overseas, they can't make it. I mean, the lack of due process here is a fundamental problem.
Georgina, can I just make, because the Human Rights Commission had been brought into this by the Prime Minister, who attacked them for wasting government money and the court's time. The Human Rights Commission put out a statement today saying they had nothing to do with the case. They dealt with this last year, it was over, the case was taken privately by an employee of QUT.
Well, I mean, the facts don't support that. Under the Racial Discrimination Act, the Human Rights Commission does have the power to knock out vexatious claims. So the Human Rights Commission would have received this complaint from, in this case, the complainant was a lady called Cindy Pryor, and if they thought that the complaint was vexatious, they could have kicked it out. They didn't. They went through a...
They said they dealt with it, it was finished, and then the case is separate. They didn't bring it.
Well, I don't think the facts support
that's their statement, that's what I'm saying. Anthony Albanese.
Well, the Human Rights Commission doesn't bring cases. The Human Rights Commission role is to promote conciliation, and last year they dealt with more than 20,000 complaints. How many do we know about? We know about a couple. And the focus at the moment, there's a huge campaign about Bill Leak's cartoon, for example. Now, Bill Leak's cartoon is covered not just by 18C, you can have a debate about offence, but it's also covered by 18D.
Well, we don't know that.
Which provides for...
That's yet to be determined.
You got your go, now I get my freedom of speech. Now... And I mean, that's the problem here. The idea that we do not have freedom of speech in this country is quite frankly absurd. This is a government without an agenda for the economy or education or health, looking for conflict, not looking for solutions, looking to complain, looking to divide. And I want a country that is stronger by unity. And one of the things that the Racial Discrimination Act and the Sex Discrimination Act and these pieces of legislation do is to try to promote cohesion and harmony and unity. And of course I don't think that Bill Leak, I don't like the cartoon, but there won't be any consequences of it. These QUT students, you spoke about the legal processes were gone through and it was found, quite rightly, that there was no case to answer. So this obsession, whenever the government gets into trouble, as it did under Tony Abbott for a while there, and now at the moment without an agenda, they go into the drawer and out comes these issues to divide people. And I just don't think that there is a massive problem here. If there is, in terms of the threshold, one of the things that the Human Rights Commission have said is that they should have greater power perhaps to just dismiss vexatious claims and to do it quicker. If that's the case, well, they say they don't have appropriate powers.
It's true. Their statement today made precisely that point, and they're arguing that they've asked the Attorney-General to raise the bar, the threshold, but he hasn't done it.
And they haven't done it. They haven't taken any action because they're not interested in solutions. They're interested in a big debate over a cartoon in particular, which has been a focus of page one stories day after day after day.
But the debate, presumably, is because action has been taken against the cartoonist. There wouldn't be a debate if there hadn't been action taken.
But not by the Human Rights Commission. Action's been taken by some individuals who've put in a complaint. I have no doubt that it'll go nowhere.
OK, well, let's go back to James Patterson on that, because I'm sure you want to respond to that.
Thank you, yeah. I just don't know how you can say, Albo, that there's been no consequences of 18C, particularly for these students in the QUT case. 3.5 years of their lives were taken up by this legal dispute. Thankfully, they've got excellent pro bono legal representation, but their lawyers have estimated that their legal fees would be up to $600,000 to $700,000 if they had to defend themselves. That's the financial cost. The personal cost is one of these students, Callum Thwaites, was studying an education degree, and after he graduated, his dream was to go and teach in remote Indigenous schools to teach Indigenous kids. But he knew, after he'd been smeared in this case, that he was always going to be just one Google search away from losing his job. That is the real cost of these laws.
I'm not saying it's not an issue.
Lives.
I'm not saying it's not an issue, but let's look at it. It isn't because of 18C being there.
It absolutely
isn't because
is.
of 18D being there. It isn't because of that. It's because of the threshold. And the Human Rights Commission itself today have publicly called for a solution to those issues in terms of vexation claims. Why doesn't the government seize that opportunity?
Okay, well,
very briefly on this,
okay,
Tony.
yes. Well, the Attorney-General has it within his power to actually raise the threshold. Will he do it?
I'm open to that, but I don't believe on its own it will be sufficient to stop a future QUT case. And we know that because Gillian Triggs said on the 7:30 report tonight that in her view and in the Commission's view, the QUT case had substance. So she thinks a case like that has substance and needs to go on to the next stage, in this case to the courts. That means I have no confidence that any change to that law would stop cases like this happening again.
Just a quick question, because I mentioned earlier Malcolm Turnbull came out after the federal court dismissed this case. Malcolm Turnbull came out and blamed the Human Rights Commission. He said they were the ones wasting the money. But of course, as we mentioned earlier, they did not put the case to the court. So did he miss the mark there?
Well, the Human Rights Commission's handling of this case has been so appalling that even Gillian Triggs has appointed a lawyer to investigate it and to examine the Commission's conduct. As Georgina mentioned, one of the failings of the Commission was to wait almost 14 months before notifying the students that they were subject of a complaint and to give them 3 days' notice that they had to attend a compulsory conciliation. Some of those students weren't even able to arrange legal representation for themselves. So the Human Rights Commission absolutely has questions to answer over this case.
Naomi, listening to this, do you have similar debates in Canada about these issues?
You know, it could be that our laws are a little clearer in that I don't know. But I think it's very clear that people have protection against incitement, right? So it isn't that you have a right to be free from offence. That's impossible to legislate. But if something is clearly inciting hatred against an identifiable group, then we do have protections, and people are pretty at peace with that. Then again, we also, to respond to something said earlier, you know, we've had legal gay marriage since 2005, and we don't live in a dictatorship. It seems to be going okay for us, and so
we may come back to this issue.
Yeah. Okay. No. Here's what I'll observe, because this is really much too in the weeds for me to, you know, I don't know the specifics of these cases. But one thing I will observe from what I've seen in just even in my week in Australia is that there does seem to be something of a campaign against people using laws in this country to defend themselves, right, and to defend their communities. You know, I hear words like green lawfare when people try to use existing legislation to do the things that legislation is intended to do. And the UN Special Rapporteur...
But law is always in a state of flux, and people adjust laws. If they're not working very well, they adjust them.
They do, but there appears to be a pattern.
The QUT case seems to be a case where the law did not work very well.
And I'll have to trust you on that, because I know absolutely nothing about that case. But what I will say is that the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders was here last month and observed that there was a pattern, a seeming pattern of attacks on the ability to invoke these types of protections that exist precisely for this purpose. So I would sort of zoom out a little bit and say, what is going on with civil society in this country? Why are there laws being pushed to make different forms of protest illegal, up the penalties? I would observe, as a Canadian, that this is the kind of thing that our government did just before they lost power.
We've got to move on to
using all of these mechanisms.
Sorry, we're going to move on to questions about the US election. I'm going to quickly give James Patterson a right of reply, but a brief one, if you would.
Yeah, just very quickly on Canada. They did have a law. It was very similar to 18C. It was called Section 13 of the Human Rights Act, and it was repealed by the Canadian Parliament after it was used in a very similar way that 18C was used against Andrew Bolt. It was used against a Conservative columnist in Canada called Mark Stein, and after the uproar about that, people agreed that freedom of speech had had been threatened in Canada, and the law was repealed, and Australia should follow them and do the same.
OK, let's move on. Remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A, you never do, of course, but send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and Quanda, and keep an eye on our Twitter account and the Conversation website for fact checks by the experts. The next question comes from Sarah Elam.
Hi. Will the fact the FBI only absolved Hillary Clinton after 42 million people had cast their votes affect the outcome of the election?
Don Watson, we'll start with you there. Obviously, a couple of days before the vote, we do get the FBI sort of saying no wrong was done.
Yes. Well, I wasn't expecting that. Of all the questions about the American election, it's all happening too fast. Look, I don't know. I mean, the whole thing is a sort of an amazing shambles. And it's one of the longest shambles ever. It actually, most of you probably haven't been reading The Faraway Tree lately, but I have. And I hadn't realised that Enid Blyton was a prophet. But, you know, when the kids keep going, they go up through a cloud and there's a different land there each time, topsy-turvy land and you know, the land of spells. And now you put your head up in this sort of this Tea Party land where everybody is sort of on welfare but hates big government, and they've been on it for so long they can't remember that the government gives it to them. There's gun land where everyone has guns but says bread knives are really the biggest problem, and there's liberal land where they think, you know, that they practice tolerance, but they can't understand anybody west of the Appalachians, and so on. And look,
well, there's FBI land as well.
There is FBI land.
What did you think when James Comey, the director of the FBI, intervened and pretty much turned the election on its head?
Well, he turned it on its head sort of briefly, didn't he? I mean, it was more like a somersault. He sort of turned it on, and everyone said, "Oh no, hell, what's going to happen now?" And then it was back upside down again. Well, I thought, is he a kind of Republican plant in the FBI? Or, you know, I felt a bit sorry for him because I thought sort of thought that he might be. I had a feeling that he might be doing the right thing, or thought he was, mistakenly. But that didn't seem to work out either. I honestly don't understand all those sort of insider things that are going on. But it did seem like a rather outrageous intervention in the process. But then it's been an election of outrageous interventions at every step. And
well, I'll throw it around the panel. Naomi, what did you think? It's a strange intervention, but it's possible, of course, that he was getting ahead of his own agents in New York, who have been pushing this case very hard and most likely would have leaked the fact that Anthony Weiner's computer had emails on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do think it has had an effect on the election. I mean, we know that because, you know, Hillary lost some of her lead. She still has an edge, but she had a more decisive lead before this happened. And I think that what starts to happen, it's less about the substance than, you know, people remember the Clinton years. They remember the sort of endless investigations, the endless controversies, and it's just like, oh, is this what is this what we're facing again? And Donald Trump's been very good at playing on that. But I mean, none of the options are good. I think the really worrying thing now is that it's clear that even if she does win, and it does look like she will win, it won't be the end. But, you know, they'll be using this endlessly. Yeah, it's a really bad situation. I think we all have we're going to have post-election stress disorder. I know I do. And you know, we also don't know what would have happened, you know, if we'd known what we know about what Hillary Clinton did during the primaries, what that would have done for Bernie Sanders, if we knew that her campaign was leaking, you know, town hall questions ahead of time that Bernie didn't have.
Yes, thank you, Vladimir Putin, for letting us know. Now then, we'll quickly go to, we've got quite a few questions on this, so we'll go to another one here from the rest of the panel. Lloyd Cox, go ahead.
Yeah, my question also was for Naomi and Don. I mean, as you already said, many people in Australia and indeed all around the world agree that the 2016 US presidential election's a circus and it's a complete travesty of democracy. But if Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are the symptoms, What is the underlying illness that is besetting US politics and US society more generally?
I'm going to go to the rest of the panel first, if you don't mind, questioner. So, Georgina.
Well, I actually don't think there is an underlying illness. I think the selection of Donald Trump in the Republican primaries was really down to a few things. One, there were 12 candidates who went into the primaries, which is quite different from 2012 when there were only 4 candidates who went into the Republican primaries. He always had the plurality of the votes. He was a celebrity, he was entertaining. The Republican establishment backed Jeb Bush, who never really wanted it. He was a pretty underwhelming campaigner. And Donald Trump, he didn't lead by that much at the beginning, but he always led by enough as the other candidates dropped off. It's a first past the post system, so even if he only got 20%, the others were getting 5–10%, Donald Trump came out the victor. Hillary, well, you know, I guess her nomination, I mean, I'm sure Naomi has some views on this. It seems like the DNC always had planned for her to get that nomination. What you've got are 2 candidates who are really not, I mean, I don't consider that the Republicans have a genuine candidate in this race. Donald Trump is not a conservative. He doesn't share most of the values of the Republican Party.
What would you describe him as, very briefly?
He is Donald Trump. And he is running for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And someone did an analysis of all his tweets, and he spends a lot of time on Twitter at all hours of the day.
So he's most likely going to shift the White House into that post office he's just renovated next door.
And why not? And I think his most used word was I and Donald. I mean, it's all about him. That's his ideology.
Anthony Albanese, would you address the sort of broader question there?
Well, 2 sleeps to go, and people have been, I guess, watching this a bit bemused, but it's hard to turn away from this contest. It is hard to see in the current climate someone like Donald Trump coming through our political system. On either the left or the right, but a left-wing version of him. I think it's made me feel pretty good about Australian democracy. I mean, if you look at the entire processes, including the primaries, you don't have anything like the scrutiny that we have in this country. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister of Australia, was on AM this morning. You know, with a tough interviewer, Michael Brissenden, answering questions. People come in this panel. I did a whole show with Christopher Pyne here during the election campaign, taking all questions. There's none of that. They have some debates, but the questions are lined up. Everything else is set-piece appearances with flags and balloons. I mean, I feel very positive about Australia's democracy, and I think we should celebrate the good things about it by comparison with having a look at what they've gone through in terms of the processes there.
James Paterson.
Yeah, look, I don't really know what caused it, but I think America's still an amazing country, a great country even, but clearly Americans are disillusioned with their political class. Clearly they're sick and tired of being told things by their political class and not feeling like those things have been delivered upon. I think, and that applies equally to both sides. Like Albo, I'm glad that Australia seems to be far away from that, but I think we can't afford to be complacent in Australia. We have to always make sure, particularly politicians like us, that we are in touch, that we are doing what we say we'll do, because otherwise we will have the same kind of cynicism about our politicians and our leaders, and that would not be a healthy thing.
Don Watson, you spent a fair bit of time watching this process at first hand. What do you think about the question? Is there an underlying illness in US politics? That was the core of the question.
Well, the 44% of the voting population who are going to vote for Trump at the moment, as of about an hour ago, think there is an underlying illness. They think America is no longer great. And the Republicans have basically been arguing that for some time. And on the other side, the people who are going to vote against Trump, the non-Clintonite people who are going to vote for Trump, also think the place is no good. Elizabeth Warren thinks the place is rigged. I think there is a really deep malaise, and I think if you drive around, you find a lot of Americans who feel the same way for one reason or another, whether you're out in Tea Party country or in the Rust Belt, or if you're in Madison, Wisconsin, or somewhere like that, which is a very prosperous little city. I think they feel there's I think America needs some form of reintegration, that it's actually had everything that's wrong with America now, just about everything, attaches to a thread that goes all the way back. You know, there's nothing new, it's just that America is no longer... I mean, there are big questions like America has always needed a frontier of some kind. This is the extended sphere. And I think people now are wondering whether the sphere can extend any further. And it's been involved in a virtual 30-year war in the Middle East. It shows no signs of ending. And people hardly even know. There was hardly a question in the debates. That's another sort of illness in the society. I agree entirely with Anthony that the American media, I mean, if you want to do something about Australian democracy, leave the ABC alone. I'm sorry, but really, I mean, it does make a difference to the culture of this place, the political culture and elsewhere. The American media it's talking heads and supers running underneath, which is incapable of actually analysing anything other than the short-term political story. Quite incapable of it. And Trump realised this. I used to work for a Prime Minister who had a theory, he used to call it the dirty big rock in the pond. That is, when things were going really badly, you threw a sort of dead cat into something, and the next morning the pond looked different. You know, a few lily pads were turned over, there was a dead frog, the whole environment had changed, the ecology had changed, and you start again. He did that maybe 2 or 3 times in his political career. Trump worked out if you did it every half hour, and you just kept the thing moving, and you're on the TV. Most people take their politics in America while they're on the treadmill or they're going to work or whatever, and as long as his head was there and he was saying these things, it's not a democracy. It's a kind of madhouse. But again, Trump is not new. I mean, Trump is P.T. Barnum, he's Liberace, he's Davy Crockett, he's all these people all the way back. He's an amazing amalgam of American figures.
He probably denied the Liberace one, but adopt all the others. Naomi, what do you think?
Well, you know, I think something really significant has happened during this election. It's unprecedented in my lifetime. It became a referendum, really, about neoliberalism. Right now is a referendum about, you know, Donald Trump and whether or not this sort of crazy person is going to get in the White House. But if you look at Bernie Sanders' campaign and you look at Trump's campaign, these core questions about who is free trade, so-called free trade, benefiting, the growing inequality, the erosion of people's standard of living, and these ideas that since Reagan were unsayable, you know, free public education, free college education, demands for a $15 minimum wage. These are big shifts, and I think if we can keep Trump out of the White House, it actually could possibly be a good situation.
So you trust Hillary Clinton as president?
Not at all. I don't trust it, but what I trust
because that's the alternative, isn't it?
What I trust
you get one or the other.
Is people's mistrust of Hillary Clinton. In that, I think people would go into a Hillary Clinton presidency with their eyes wide open, not gaga like Obama, no love affair, no honeymoon, and also really energized by what Bernie Sanders was able to do. I mean, think about this, right? I mean, we've forgotten about it because so much crazy has happened since, but a self-described democratic socialist came within a hair's breadth of becoming the leader of the Democratic Party, running a very bold campaign. He got 12 million votes. He took more than 20 states, okay? And his movement has not gone away. They're staying organized.
And Trump's movement won't go away if he loses as well. So where does that leave American politics?
Well, I think best case scenario, Hillary Clinton wins, and all of this discontent stays mobilized. We put pressure on Hillary Clinton, I say we because I have dual Canadian and American citizenship, and push her on all the things that we know she isn't going to be good enough on. And we win some victories on climate, on racial justice, you know, and we move.
Okay, you know? Still quite a few questions to come. We've got one from Will McCulloch.
Notwithstanding all the horrible things Donald Trump said, given his rise in the polls and his increasing possibility over the last few months of becoming president, has it been okay for Australian politicians to disparage him? Have these politicians put short-term pat on the backs from the electorate ahead of Australia's long-term national interest?
James Paterson.
Yeah, Donald Trump is not really my cup of tea as a Republican candidate, but I think that, and likewise I have a fair few disagreements with Hillary Clinton, I imagine, but I do think it's incumbent, particularly on Australian politicians, to be measured in our language. Our most important international relationship is with the United States. Our most important alliance is with the United States. And there's not much different from a 50-50 chance that Donald Trump will be president or Hillary Clinton will be president, and we have to have a productive working relationship with either of them. So my advice to my colleagues is always to be very measured in your comments about these things, even if you strongly disagree with what they say. The reality is we do have to work with whoever the American people choose.
What if you strongly agree, like Cory Bernardi?
Sorry?
What if you strongly agree, like Cory Bernardi?
Yeah, likewise.
So over there in America, tweeting away that people should essentially vote for Trump.
Yeah, likewise. I think as far as possible, we can certainly comment on how it will affect our interests and what our interests are, but as far as possible, we should stay out of other people's politics and not wade in it too heavily if we can.
Sorry, Don, I did interrupt you, sorry.
No, I was saying you'd reprimand John Howard for saying that Al-Qaeda would welcome Barack Obama's election.
He was widely reprimanded for it.
Right.
Yeah.
He wasn't reprimanded for... he wasn't obviously Prime Minister when he did it, but for campaigning for Brexit, for example.
Yeah, and look, I supported Brexit too because I thought it was in Australia's national interest. I think it's a great thing that England is now able to have a better relationship with Australia than it was able to when it was in the European Union. So I think it's okay to comment on how it affects our interests, but we should just be careful on how we wade into other people's domestic politics.
OK, Anthony Albanese, what about, I mean, an awful lot of people on both sides of politics have been disparaging of Trump. Risky or not?
Well, there's a context here, which is that Donald Trump's own party, you can have a debate over how much of a Republican he is, but he's a Republican candidate, have been bagging him as well. I mean, John McCain and leaders of everyone except for Giuliani essentially has abandoned this bloke. So normally it would be the case that people would be far more measured, but when someone is so over the top, it's not surprising that politicians from time to time have made the odd comment, but it is moderate compared with what members of his own party have said about him.
Yep. And if he does become president, how difficult will it be for Australia to adjust to that? I mean, the ANZUS Treaty might be on the line. Relationships across the region could change substantially.
Oh, look, I'm very much hoping for Hillary Clinton to win tomorrow US time, but Wednesday our time. I think that Hillary Clinton's someone who has an engagement with our region and indeed with Australia. But we will have to work with whoever the American people elect. We don't have a vote in that. I have enough faith in the good sense of the American people, I hope.
Georgina, what do you think?
Cross fingers.
I think Hillary is a very much a known quantity. She was Secretary of State. She's been First Lady. She's been a senator. She is part of the US establishment, and her policies will be, I think, pretty much business as usual in terms of a handover from Obama. Trump really is a bit of an unknown. Some of his foreign policy pronouncements have been pretty concerning in terms of ANZUS, but you know, it's anyone's guess because he doesn't actually have a strong interest in these issues or a background particularly, and we don't know who would be in his administration. So it's really a bit of a mystery.
Now, Naomi, you just said you've got a dual citizenship. I presume that means you can vote, but also just in the connection to Canada, you've got a sort of leftist Prime Minister in Justin Trudeau. And I'm just wondering how he has responded to the prospect of a potential Trump presidency.
He's also been very measured, careful, and I think it's I think for politicians, particularly with U.S. elections, it's not just that you want to hedge your bets in case he wins. It's also that. It's a very nationalist movement that he's a part of, and so anything that's seen as foreign interference, which I understand you guys don't like either here, but that could actually help him, right? I mean, he would no doubt use that. So I don't think it's just that people are afraid of saying, "Oh, we're against Trump." I think they're afraid that doing that would actually help Trump, and I think it probably would. Right. Among his constituency, I don't think they're particularly concerned with how they're viewed in Australia. One thing I would say, though, is that one of the reasons why I can't wait to be rid of Trump if this does happen is that I think, you know, he's lowered the bar so much that anything can seem sane in comparison, right? And I think we can all feel terrifically smug, right? Because we're not that crazy. But I would say that, you know, I do believe that, and I'm sorry to drum on about this, and I did it the last time I was on Q&A, but I think that Donald Trump talking about building the wall with Mexico is insane and racist. But I also think what Australia is doing on Nauru and Manus is as well. And I think we shouldn't be so self-satisfied.
Okay, we'll come to it. And Don, just a last word on the US election.
And you're actually doing it. He's just talking about it.
That's right. Do you imagine a Trump presidency, what that would be like for this country?
Well, I have imagined it, but I mean, it comes out in all sorts of very strange ways. I mean, I think it's sort of an unspeakable prospect. You know, the man is a horror, just a horror, and we have no idea what he's going to do. And I think any political system that throws up a Trump and gets him to the verge of the presidency has got big problems, really serious problems. Not because Trump is Trump, but because the people, there is such a large lump of the American population who are utterly pissed off with the way the country works. No, you know, and Hillary calls them, in a written speech, called them a basket of deplorables. I don't know you put deplorables in a basket, but anyway. But, I mean, there are only some of them. You know, there's a whole stack of people who are perfectly sane Americans who are going to vote for Trump because they can't bear the prospect of another Clinton in the White House. And I find it hard to bear, too. I think if you're an American, I think you feel deeply insulted that the wife of the former president is going to end up president again. It is like a sort of insult to the democracy. And they feel also that she took over the Democratic Party, she and Bill, 30 years ago on a neoliberal, pragmatic progressivism ticket. And this is what Sanders ran into and what he was running against. So it's a very horrible choice, except that from our point of view, it has to be Hillary.
OK, we're going to leave it there. Let's move along. Our next question, very different subject, comes from Jim Stanford. Go ahead, Jim.
Tony, my question's for Senator Patterson. It's about climate and the energy industry. We all know that a huge transition in energy is coming. It's inevitable. We have to move away from fossil fuels. We have to move away from coal in particular. The longer we wait, the harder that transition is going to be for consumers, for the environment, for the affected workers. Yet your government seems to double down every chance it gets to try and portray renewables as dangerous or too expensive. You exploited the blackout in South Australia. You're exploiting the closure of Hazelwood to try and promote panic instead of progress. You're denying a just transition for the affected workers. When will your government accept once and for all that the energy system has to change and start to lead that change rather than standing in the way of it?
James Patterson.
There's a lot to unpack in that question, but I guess to focus on the core of it, I'm really positive about technological change and evolution, and I'm really positive that the innovation that we're already seeing and that we're going to see over the next few years will help us meet the challenge of climate change. I think, for example, that Tesla, the electric car, is a wonderful innovation and a really exciting thing, and the sooner that that's commercially viable and can be adopted on a wide scale, the better. Having said that, we cannot be closed-minded about the impact that it will have on people in the meantime going through that transition, and the Hazelwood closure is a good case in point. So we don't just have the 1,000-odd workers whose jobs rely on that, who are going to be affected detrimentally by the closure, but we also have Victorians, my home state, and Australians who rely very much on the cheap, reliable baseload power that Hazelwood provides. It alone, one power plant provides 5% of the national electricity market, and the three other brown coal-fired power plants in the Latrobe Valley provide a total of 25% together of the national electricity market. That's an extraordinary amount. We can't just turn it off. It's the cheapest source of energy, and if we did just turn it off straight away, we would have a massive spike in electricity prices, and that would hurt people, that would hurt businesses, that would affect employment. So if we're going to make this transition, it has to be in a way that is mindful of the impact that it has on people. We can't just be closed-minded about that.
James, let's quickly go back to our question. I saw you shaking your head there. I mean, do you want to quickly respond to that before I go to the other panel?
Well, the brown coal power is not cheap if you consider the total costs of it, including the environmental costs, which we cannot deny. And your government, while you stress the need for technological innovation, your government's been cutting the funding for innovation around green energy as well. So if we really need the transition, and if you agree with that, the government has to lead the way instead of declaring a holy war every opportunity that it gets to show that this is, going to be a disaster if we stop this.
Well, personally, I think we should take an agnostic approach to energy sources. I don't have a preferred source of energy based on any characteristic other than its innate characteristics of electricity. How efficient is it? How cheap is it? All the environmental impacts, all the different impacts.
Wait, do you believe that climate change is real?
Yes, I do.
Well, how can you be agnostic about which energy source you have? If climate change is real, you can't be agnostic.
Well, one of the factors I said that we should take into account is the environmental impact of the energy source. So what I'm saying is energy sources aren't inherently good or bad on their own. They have characteristics, and we should weigh those up evenly and allow them to compete, and the best ones will prevail. And I'm confident that we will have technological evolution if it's better, and I think it will be, and I think it is.
OK, I'm going to go to the other side of the panel and hear from Anthony Albanese. I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Anthony.
Thank you. Look, climate change is real, and we need to have a whole-of-government response to it and a whole-of-community and civil society response to it. This is the challenge of our generation. And if you have proper costing that includes the cost of pollution through carbon, then renewables stack up every time. Renewables, the price is going down all the time as volume and new technology comes through. When we adopted the 20% by 2020 target for renewable energy in Australia, the target was 2%. People said that's too ambitious, you won't get there. Now, this government has no target beyond 2020, none. We have a 50% target by 2030, that's ambitious, but we believe we can get there. And of course, as part of that is planning for the transition to a carbon-constrained economy and an emissions-free economy down the track. And you have to do that by taking into account communities and the workforce. Now, one of the things that we did in the Latrobe Valley was that we had an economic transition plan, and that was cut in 2014 by the incoming government, cut $9.6 million from that. We need to work out where the jobs are for the future for those communities, provide training, provide that support so that we don't just have an exodus. That's got to be a part of the transition. If we do that and do it right, then we can get good employment outcomes. And I always find the sort of contradiction between, we need brown coal and we don't need renewables because we need jobs and what's provided. These are the same people who had a completely free market approach to the car industry and basically told them to leave Australia, and those jobs left.
I'm going to quickly go to, we've got another question on this subject, and then we'll bring in the other panellists. Joseph Sekulu.
Thank you. So last year in Paris, the world agreed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. 1.5 degrees would mean that places like my family have in Tonga, countries like Kiribati, Tuvalu and the Marshall Islands, it means that these places would have a chance of survival. But to achieve this means no new coal, oil and gas projects, but the Australian government continued to bow to the demands of the fossil fuel industry, and we're just seeing that with them not ratifying Paris and pushing through the Adani mines in Queensland. My question is for Naomi. How does the world view Australia's inaction on climate change?
OK, let's hear the answer.
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the world. But I can say that now that in Canada we got rid of our Tory government that was kind of providing political cover for the Australian government, that among wealthy industrialized countries, Australia now stands alone raising the middle finger to the world and saying we are not going to act. We are going to build massive new coal mines like the Carmichael mine, huge natural gas terminal, pipelines in the Northern Territories, opening up vast fracking fields. These are carbon bombs. This is unburnable carbon if we are going to live up to the sacred promise that we made in Paris to countries like your home country, right? The slogan of low-lying Pacific Island states in Paris was 1.5 to stay alive. I mean, it doesn't get more direct than that, because if we don't live up to that target, then these countries will almost certainly disappear beneath the waves. And what we now know is that even a 2-degree temperature rise is incompatible with any new fossil fuel projects. Existing fossil fuel production blows the carbon budget. So we need to start winding down. And to come back to Jim's question, right? We need a just transition plan, a managed decline, right? We can't leave it to the wilds of the market. And this is, I think, why, I asked you if you believe in climate change. And I asked you that because you've been associated with IPA. We have 2 people from this one think tank, IPA, on this panel. And this is the foremost organ in Australia for spreading climate change denial and doubt. Now, you may personally not agree with that, but the IPA publishes discredited climate change deniers like Willie Soon this year, Anthony Watts this year in your fact book. And this is slowing us down, and this is getting in the way of action. The rest of the world is in Marrakesh.
You've made a claim that needs a response.
I have to say one other thing, which is you raised the Tesla, okay? Just yesterday, there was a piece quoting Elon Musk, inventor of the Tesla, saying we need a popular uprising against fossil fuels. I can't do it alone, just with tech. This is the guy who invented the Tesla that you're saying, I like new technology. It isn't enough just to invest in the new technology. We need that, but we also have to stand up to the extraordinary power of coal, oil, and gas.
Okay, all right, now we've got to hear from everybody. Georgina, you are with the IPA now. Senator Patterson was once, so you can speak on their behalf.
Well, the IPA is absolutely committed to research and discussion of the facts. And the issue with this climate change consensus around science is that you use a lot of political language. Consensus is a political word. Science should be about facts, and the climate science is a constantly evolving science because our data sets are very, very, very small. We don't have satellite data from 1,000 years ago because obviously satellites weren't invented. So the IPA is absolutely committed. We don't have an IPA opinion on climate change per se. We have a committed line of research into the facts, and we use a variety of different scientists in our publications, and that's the prima facie approach. It's not a particular political agenda. We don't have a political agenda here.
No, you're a free market think tank, and the reason why it is so that free market think tanks like IPA and the Heartland Institute, which you've partnered with, are so determined to raise questions, raise doubts about this issue where there is overwhelming scientific consensus that climate change is real. There's debates about the details, but there is overwhelming scientific consensus. 98% of climate scientists agree that humans are causing the planet to warm, okay? The reason why free market think tanks, who are not scientific organizations, are the ones spreading the doubt is because if it is true, your whole worldview collapses. This whole idea of pushing deregulation and privatization and government get out of the way falls apart because we need to manage this decline. We need to make sure that people aren't
let's hear whether Senator Patterson's whole world has just collapsed.
I'm trying.
On the contrary, Naomi, I think it equally applies. If it applies to us, it applies to you. I mean, you have openly said that one of the great things about climate change is it's a great tool for bringing down the capitalist system, and you want to undermine the capitalist system. No. Your whole recent book is about this changes everything. What changes everything? This is the opportunity to change the political debate about capitalism and free markets because climate change is a great tool to do that. That is your own view, which you've espoused many times.
That debate is happening anyway, because this system is failing people on multiple levels. That's why you have this rise of people like Donald Trump saying, a billionaire running against billionaires, right? People know that this system is not working for them. And what I have said is that this same system that is waging war on people's quality of life, that is spreading inequality, also happens to be at war with life on Earth, this system that puts profit above all else.
I'm going to quickly go to Don. You're listening to this. Where do your sympathies lie in this discussion?
Not with the IPA this time. No, I'm always stunned by the neoliberals who think that, that free market can do anything, and have backed an ideology now for 30 years which has put millions of people out of work and has turned countries on their head and sent some to ruin. But when it comes to closing down Hazelwood Power Station, this is a hell of a problem. I mean, my God, this is big. How can we do this gently? How can we be really kind to these people? And how can we keep electricity prices down? You would think 1 minute that the markets can just solve any problem at all. Just let it go and it'll all work. It's all there in the hidden hands of Adam Smith. But then when it's a problem like this, oh, big problem here. What are we going to do about this? You know, oh God, these poor people, they're going to be out of work. And at the same time, you have Malcolm coming out, the moment he's elected and saying, I'm so confident about Australia, I'm excited, we can do whatever we like, innovation, agility. But the moment he's up against a problem, oh no, this is too hard. I find it stunning, the ducking and weaving on this, but it's fairly simple to explain. I mean, you do have a problem with the fossil fuel industry. No one wants to take them on. And so you don't. You don't. That's all.
OK. I've got another question to go to, Anthony, but if you're very brief, you can have a...
Just one of the ironies of the debate, though, in Australia is that the current government abandoned the market-based mechanism, which put a price on carbon, and moved to essentially a sort of Stalinist government-determined grant system of picking winners. That hasn't worked at all, just paid the polluters to do what they were doing already and what they're continuing to do.
OK, I'm not going to... That'll hijack the rest of the program. We've got to move on. Next question is from April Rodder.
My question's for you, Anthony Albanese. Can you confirm that Labor will vote down the lifetime banning of people who are desperately trying to save their own lives by fleeing to Australia, the nation they sought safety with and trusted to care for them, for the sake of humanity?
Well, I've missed the Shadow Cabinet because I'm here talking to you. Shadow Cabinet...
Don't tell us you don't know what they were going to decide.
Shadow Cabinet has met by now, and I don't know what they decided because I've been here. And the caucus will meet tomorrow. I think it's been very clear that a range of people, from Bill Shorten, myself and others, have indicated that we don't see any argument that the government's put forward about this. This is all about how can we just play politics again and to try to wedge somehow the Labor Party. It hasn't succeeded. I don't know anyone who thinks that this makes some sense. And indeed, when John Key, the New Zealand Prime Minister, made it clear that if this legislation was passed, it would make it impossible for New Zealand to accept anyone from Manus and Nauru, because he wouldn't accept, as the New Zealand Prime Minister, creating 2 tiers of citizenship. That blew the government's argument out of the water.
Anthony, what if Julie Bishop has a deal that she can't talk about right now because the American election is on with Hillary Clinton to take the people from Nauru and Manus? In return, we'll take some people from Costa Rica.
Do you really think Hillary Clinton's been concentrating on this issue in the last couple of months, Tony?
I'm just saying...
It's so absurd. This is a government that when it's in trouble, goes back to asylum seekers and goes back to trying to divide the community, whether it's about 18C or asylum seekers. That's where it goes. Okay. And it's in trouble at the moment on a whole range of issues. We've got a Senate that we don't know who's legitimate or not sitting there, referring senators to the High Court. You've got a government that doesn't have an agenda on education or health or anything else for that matter, and hence is just going down this negative road. OK, all right. We've
got time for one last question and then I'll hear from the rest of the panel. A question, and it's related to this, comes from Thomas Tapia. OK, Thomas.
What is the difference between Australia's operation of sovereign borders and Donald Trump's wall?
James Patterson.
Well, for one, For one, the detention centres on Manus Island and Nauru are open centres where people can come and go. They can have jobs, they have healthcare, they can go to school. So that's one difference. But coming back to Albo's point, in 2013, the Labor Party under Kevin Rudd ran a taxpayer-funded advertising campaign, and it was in Australia and overseas, and it said, if you come here by boat, you will never be settled in Australia. All the policy that Peter Dutton has announced seeks to do is to give effect to that promise, to put into law what that says. If you come to Australia by boat, you will never be settled in Australia. So there are two options here. One is that Albo, who was a member of the cabinet that approved that, and the Labor Party were insincere at the time and they were just saying that for political reasons, or it's possible that they've changed their mind. If they've changed their mind, fair enough, but they should fess up and explain to the Australian people why they've changed their mind and why they promised before this election to be a carbon copy of the Coalition on Border Protection has been abandoned.
OK, you get 20 seconds on that because you have to be able to respond to that.
Well, it's just not true. It's just not true. And what you just went through an election campaign saying you had all the policies right. You had, you'd solved the problems, you'd stopped the boats, all the policy mechanisms were there. Why is it that this wasn't mentioned at any stage during an election campaign that was only completed on July 2?
OK.
What you're trying to do isn't just permanent settlement, it's visit. If someone was settled, say Hillary Clinton has actually been concentrating on this issue with Julie Bishop. Let's take your theoretical view, and someone is settled as a US citizen. In 40 years' time, they can't visit here? That's just absurd.
No, they may be able to because the Immigration Minister will have the power to make exemptions to the law and in exceptional circumstances.
All right, let's hear from the other panellists. Naomi Klein, you started talking about this earlier. I stopped you. You can talk about it now.
Well, I think it's fitting that that question came from a young person. You know, I realize I've been tough on Australia on this panel as a token foreigner here. I think this country has to be better than this, you know, to see the two major parties debating such a core human right, you know. I spent the morning as part of the Peace Prize festivities at a high school, at the Cabramatta High School. And there were students from 42 different countries of origin. And they put on this absolutely beautiful celebration of diversity, cultural diversity, language diversity. And I just think we should put them in charge. Because this is, no, I think it's outrageous. The New York Times ran an editorial calling this proposal cruel, short-sighted, and shameful. I hear this argument that it's sending, we can't send a message to the people smugglers. What about the message you're sending to refugees around the world? What message are you sending about Australia? And the implication that the only way people die is at sea? They die in war zones when they can't flee. That's why we welcome refugees.
I'm being told, actually, we're over time, and I'm sorry to the rest of the panel who might have wanted to respond to that, but that's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, Don Watson, James Patterson, Naomi Klein, Georgina Downer and Anthony Albanese. Thank you very much. Now, next week I'm taking a break and Virginia Trioli will take control of Q&A in the aftermath of the US election with the Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, Shadow Minister for Early Childhood and Vocational Education, Kate Ellis, Global Security and Diplomacy expert, Joe Siracusa, and American theoretical physicist, Lisa Randall. Can Professor Randall's five-dimensional warped geometry explain that wacky election? Join Virginia next week to find out. For now, good night.
Wednesday, the result.
Join me in Washington as we break down the key moments, the results, the upsets and all the highlights.
Plus, reaction from around the world and what it means for Australia after the most extraordinary US election campaign of all time.
USA Votes, Wednesday at 7 on ABC.
I got a surprise. We absolutely cannot light 8-year-old fireworks.
Critically acclaimed comedy returns.
I feel very optimistic and enthusiastic about the future.
With a new season of the show...
I'm a fun guy, remember?
...that has the world raving.
Is this an intervention? It's weird because I don't want to be in the threesome, but I do feel very left out.
New Please Like Me starts Wednesday, 9:30. Plus, binge on the complete first 3 seasons now on iView.
I've been hanging to watch the finale together.
Yeah, me too.
All of a sudden, like, everyone's hit panic station.
You watched this, didn't you? When?
At the bus stop. On the bus, at school, in the car, at Dan's house, when I was walking the dog.
Who's Dan?
With Freeview FV, the Freemans can watch live and catch up TV wherever they may be. Keep up with the Freemans. Download the Freeview FV mobile app today.
The art, the attitude, the...
farting dog. Genius.
From the fringe...
Genuinely kind of surreal. No one's ever going to buy those.
...to the mainstream.
When your fat uncle is wearing a Mambo T-shirt at Christmas.
The uniquely Australian story.
Well, it was definitely an art movement.
Of the art and fashion larrikin.
People were impressed by good art. There is a fantastic, disrespectful sort of Australian vernacular humour.
Mambo, art irritates life. Tomorrow 9:30 on ABC and iView.
Hello, Fiona Ellis-Jones with the latest headlines from ABC News. US Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump is crying foul after the FBI once again cleared rival Hillary Clinton of criminal conduct on her emails. The FBI director says a new inquiry into the Democratic candidate's communications has found nothing to change the Bureau's earlier conclusion. The Turnbull government has successfully moved to challenge the election of 2 crossbench senators in the High Court. Family First Senator Bob Day has now resigned, but One Nation's Rod Cullerton says he'll continue to cast his vote while the High Court deliberates. The move has sent fractures through the One Nation party after leader Pauline Hanson backed the government's bid. A scuba diver is recovering in hospital after spending 17 hours stranded at sea. The 68-year-old man went to dive at the SS Yongala wreck south of Townsville on Sunday, but failed to return to shore. The man was found 30 nautical miles from the dive site. And Australia suffered a crushing loss in the first test against South Africa in Perth. The hosts fell well short of their victory target of 539 and now have just a few days to regroup before the second test in Hobart. Those are the latest headlines from ABC News. Lateline is next.
Good evening. Tonight, the finish line finally in sight for the marathon US election campaign. As Americans prepare to go to the polls, we explain why they vote on a Tuesday of all days.
Do you know why Election Day in America is on a Tuesday?
Not really. No, I don't know.
I do not either.
But we go every year.
Oh, no, I'm going to end up on like one of those YouTube videos like, oh, this guy doesn't even know why he's voting.
Oh, gosh. Does it have something to do with the former president?
First, though, 2 years after Tony Abbott took it off the table, the push to change Australia's Racial Discrimination Act is gathering steam again. The Turnbull government is set to establish a committee to examine whether it should still be unlawful to offend or insult a person based on their race. And it's getting some unlikely support. Indigenous MP Ken Wyatt believes that section of the law has run its course and should be amended to better reflect Australia in 2016. Political correspondent David Lipson has our story.
But when it's bad law, it needs to be struck down.
I'm not in favour of changing the Racial Discrimination Act. I don't want to see people hurt. I don't want to see people vilified.
And as the Liberal Party, this is something that we stand for. This is who we are.
When a court on Friday threw out the case against 3 former Queensland University students accused of racial discrimination, the matter wasn't over. Predictably, it's only spurred on opponents of Section 18C of the Act.
The law itself is being weaponised by legal activists, which is having an attritional effect on free speech, whereby the process is the punishment.
Most agree the process failed in this case, dragging on for close to 3 years before a judge ruled it shouldn't even go to trial. The question revolves around who or what is to blame.
I think the Human Rights Commission has done a great deal of harm to its credibility.
by bringing the case against the Queensland students.
There is one person to blame for that, one person, and that's Professor Triggs.
As head of the Commission, Gillian Triggs was responsible for investigating the original complaint against several Facebook posts, including this seemingly benign online statement.
Just got kicked out of the unsigned Indigenous computer room. QUT stopping segregations with segregation.
My job is to apply the law as it currently exists, and that is of a very low threshold.
But the Commission points out it terminated its investigation over a year ago. The court case was a civil complaint with no involvement from Gillian Triggs.
It's the personal cost, it's the anxiety, it's the financial cost.
Andrew Hastie is leading the most recent charge for changes to the Act, which makes it unlawful to offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate on the basis of race, colour or national or ethnic origin.
As a minimalist position, I'd like to see offend and insult removed.
His WA Liberal colleague, the first Indigenous Australian to sit in the House of Representatives, isn't against such a move.
See, 41 years ago, when the bill was presented to the House and agreed to, it was a time in which it was needed to deal with the level of racism that Australia experienced.